Okay, hopefully we're live. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear. Let us know if you can't. Very excited for today's Business of Apps live webinar. We're going to be talking app growth tips with Dave Bell. We've done a couple of sessions before with Dave, maybe more than a couple, across the globe, from New York to Berlin to London, and of course online. Normally we'd be talking, hi Mantage, good to see you. Normally we'd be talking pure App Store optimization, and Dave has a lot of knowledge on that to share today. But he's also going to be widening things out. We're going to be widening the discussion, talking about optimizing other bits of the funnel, other bits of the app growth funnel, and how app Store optimization then leads to other things you need to do further around the user journey. Hi, Julia. Good to see you. So yeah, please say hi in the chat. A bit of housekeeping. You may or may not have used Crowdcast before. You've got a little chat box here where you can say hi or leave any comments. It's great if you can do that. We've had quite a few people do that already, so thank you. There's an ask a question box as well. So if you've got any questions, you can leave them in the chat, or we will be taking questions at the end. And I know there's often, a lot of detailed or specific questions, particularly on ASO. Dave's very good at answering them. You can leave them in the Ask a Question tab or in the chat. It's a bit easier for us to find in Ask a Question, though. So I think, without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Dave, and he's going to take you through what I've already seen looks like a lot of interesting and useful materials. So over to you, Dave.
Thanks a lot. It is great to be here. Appreciate everyone for joining this morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you are. Today, what we want to do is talk about App Store optimization and growth tips, but also focus on the stage of growth that apps are in, because I think a lot of times, when you're thinking about ASO or mobile growth or the steps that you want to take to be successful, it can be different depending on whether you're at pre-launch or soft launch or your app is mature and you're looking to optimize. First, just a little bit about me. A lot of people here might already know who I am. I've been working with Gummicube as CEO for the last 12 years. At this point, we founded Gummicube in 2009, 2010. Gummicube is really an integrated ASO company. We do everything from search optimization to conversion rate optimization to optimizing actions inside the app to reduce CPI and CPA. And we have some great technology to back that up. Personally, I've been in the mobile space going all the way back to 1999. So, the days of, Motorola flip phones when, you couldn't do multiple key presses, we were building apps and trying to make the mobile ecosystem happen. Been in the space for a long time, seen a lot of different things, and hopefully that's useful as we talk about some of these insights. And just really high level, I want to talk a little bit about how we think about App Store optimization, and then we'll dive off into some details around kind of what we do at each stage of the app lifecycle. So first, when we think of ASO, we really look at it as the leading driver of high quality users and sustainable growth for apps. Upwards of 80 or 70% of organic installs come from search. And the truth is that optimizing doesn't really start and stop inside the app stores, because ultimately, once you acquire a user, once they download your app, and ideally you're doing that at a cost per acquisition that works for your business, you want to optimize the actions that users are taking in the app. You want to make sure that people get through onboarding. You want to make sure that people get through registration. And, for us, that end-to-end cycle is all part of optimization. And, we look at all the factors, right? Metadata, creative, what's going on with ratings and reviews, paid search, how you're promoting inside the stores, and then also kind of those in-app optimization elements. When we think about kind of the stages, kind of what are the KPIs and goals associated with those activities, right? Number one, we always think about the first goal of really increasing your footprint inside the store, right? If you're successful with the basics of App Store optimization, you're watching your impressions grow, and you're watching your overall footprint grow to increase your organic discoverability. Ultimately, if you want to have an app that's very successful in scaling, you need those organic installs to push down your overall cost of acquisition and compete with the other people in your category. We want to increase keyword search rankings, but a lot of times when people think about increasing search rankings, they think about targeting keywords, and they don't realize that conversion is the reason that your app might rise or fall within search rankings. So think of what you do with keywords and metadata as kind of qualification and the ability to rank on more keywords. Think of conversion optimization as what causes you to rank up on keywords. Obviously there are factors that can kind of drive into that, reviews and ratings being one factor. If you're running, paid user acquisition, particularly channels inside the store that might influence your search ranking, and then also ultimately in-app optimization. I think, the business case for ASO is very, very clear, right? When you think about App Store optimization, we think of it like the foundation of your house, right? At the bottom of the foundation, you want to make sure you have really strong, materials. You want to make sure that, as you build the house on top of that foundation, it's not going to fall over. And so, ultimately, if you maximize your organics, if you're working on taking advantage of everything you can that's coming out of the App Store, Google Play Store, your cost of acquisition goes down, right? As you do acquire more users, you also watch your organic scale, and you have the opportunity to grow with CPIs and CPAs that are competitive, that allow you to really scale your app and your business. We look at this as kind of a cycle, right? When you think about App Store optimization, right? You want to, in each one of these kind of components of the cycle, you want to really achieve results in the App Store as well as external marketing. A lot of people, when they're doing ASO, they just think about keywords, or they just think about how their store listing is converting. But the reality is all of these activities also affect your paid user acquisition, right? Ultimately, all acquisition leads to effectively one place. Even if you're, running CPP testing and you have multiple landing pages nowadays, you want those pages to perform, and you want to build a user acquisition flow where users have a consistent experience across that journey, and they ultimately convert and become very valuable for you. We want to really look at this holistically to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of all of those marketing efforts. When you look at some of the changes that have been implemented in the App Store and Play Store, and even kind of what's coming soon, what we're finding is that Apple and Google are really shifting to an environment, in a broad sense, where we have much more robust store experiences that are a little bit more personalized, depending on where the user comes from, and also depending on whether the user is an existing user or whether they've just downloaded your app for the first time. You look at custom product pages, product page optimization on Apple. Those are examples of customizations based on where the user comes from. You look at in-app events; those are customizations based on whether a user has already downloaded your app. And you can't discount these things, because as a result of these changes being implemented, Apple and Google are changing the experience that users have in the store. And when you look at in-app events, for example, they can be important for every app, because if you don't have in-app events running, all of the users that have already downloaded your app see, a very small search result. They actually take real estate away from your app in the search result, remove your screenshots, and people, see your competitors, but they almost don't see you unless you're running some kind of promotion. So it's important to think of all these new tools that Apple and Google are giving as an active part of what you need to do to both engage new users and re-engage existing users inside the stores. When we look at user acquisition, I think, one of the most important things to do is understand, now that we have CPP, now that we have live ops and these new features in both of the stores, how do we make each individual channel more effective, right? How do we understand how to build that user acquisition flow that's unique based on the value propositions and kind of what we're promoting throughout that process? It's important to leverage these tools. You look at, the apps that are very competitive in the marketplace, they're doing these customizations, right? They're leveraging them to drive down their cost of acquisition and increase their relevancy to users inside the stores. And so people who aren't doing this, people who are leveraging kind of a single page strategy, are really falling behind from a conversion standpoint and a performance standpoint. The other thing that I think is important to point out is that, these stores are evolving very quickly. And, you look at Google Play, for example, where they do much more dynamic tests. And sometimes, you catch things one day and you don't see them the next day because they're just seeing how users react to change. We were able to pick up on an experiment that Google was running in the store where they actually put the feature graphics inside the search results. Now, if Google was to do that, not only would it become an experience a little bit more like Apple, but it would change user behavior and click share, because if you're looking at search results that actually have a feature graphic in them, you can only see 2 apps at a time. You have to scroll to see more alternatives. What you have in that feature graphic all of a sudden becomes a major conversion element inside search from a click standpoint. So we want to look at all those things and understand, how do we optimize that, and how do we plan ahead a little bit for the changes that are happening in the stores. When we think about, the entire experience of optimization, obviously optimizing reach and optimizing installs is really important. But I think ultimately, one of the reasons that as marketers, we use attribution tools and, we want to make sure that our marketing is performing, is that we want to optimize actions, right? We want to make sure that the users that we're acquiring are valuable and that they engage in their app, that they engage in our app, that they pass registration, that they pass the onboarding flow, and we kind of get them into that cycle where they're using the app. And so, at Gummicube, we look at optimizing actions in the app, optimizing that CPA actually as an important last step of App Store optimization, because ultimately you want to optimize that entire funnel. So, ultimately, when you think about how you A/B test, we've introduced some interesting new tools recently to do that. Certainly there are others in the marketplace. We leverage a tool called Optimize, right? So along with our tool for ASO, DataCube, our tools for A/B testing, SplitCube, what Optimize allows you to do is actually run A/B testing inside your app. So, instead of having a debate about whether one onboarding flow might work better than the other, with Optimize, you can just code both onboarding flows in your app, set it up for an A/B test, and you get a great dashboard that shows you which one works better. And with the click of the button, you can default to the one that has the best performance. And so now we can get to a point where you have that next dial from a marketing perspective, from an ASO perspective, to perform better, right? And to perform better inside your app for the actions that you're optimizing towards. From a lifecycle standpoint, we kind of look at the app lifecycle with our developers in a few different stages, right? There's kind of development and pre-launch, there's soft launch, there's growth, maturity, and then ultimately, when you get really far down the line, saturation, where you're really concerned about re-engagement. And, each one of these elements requires using data and using information from an ASO standpoint in a different way. And so, a lot of times when people think about App Store optimization, they're thinking just about, optimizing your keywords in your store listing or A/B testing a page for an app that already exists. But ultimately, these tools and this data can be used much early on to help you make wise choices as you're building an app. When you're thinking about that development stage, kind of starting out at the very beginning, ultimately, you really want to understand, what does feature demand look like in your category, right? If you're developing an app with a few different areas of focus, which one do you want to highlight, right? If you're having a conversation about how to build that onboarding flow, which feature do you want to promote in that first screen as people download? And also, how do you look at your competitors and what they're doing and what's successful at them? Well, you can use store data and ASO data for those analyses, so you can make good decisions. Number one, you want to do market research, right? You want to understand your niche and audience. You want to have a game plan to investigate the stores, to understand your category, to understand which category your app should be in. Ultimately, if you list your app in a category where users just aren't downloading apps with the kind of features you have, you're going to have problems from day one. So it's important to leverage the data that you can get from ASO to perform better. You want to really start also defining what your KPIs are going to be, defining what your goals are going to be, right? As you launch the app, as you build a beta or a soft launch strategy, as you think about monetization and kind of your cost of user acquisition, what should those goals be, right? What are you driving toward? Without a goal, ultimately you just spend money, and you want to understand kind of what you're going to measure against. And you'd be surprised how a lot of people don't kind of set that up in their mind before they kind of go to market. You also want a framework to build up and test, right? How do we plan on testing a user flow, right? How do we want to set ourselves up for success by building things in the app to test, and also leveraging the data we have from an ASO standpoint to experiment with different store listings and different value propositions early on, so we can really dial in to what consumers respond to. Next, pre-launch, right? And when we think about pre-launch, this is really where, aside from building the app, you take some of that data and you start to build out initial store listings. You start to test some of those theories. And, really, you want to make sure that you're appealing to the right audience. You want to make sure you understand the apps you're competing against, and you're implementing a store listing, right, as you're going into that pre-launch process that is targeting the right keywords, that has the right features on it, that takes into account how your app might appear inside the store compared to other apps as users scroll through the store, so that it's competitive and that it stands out. It's very, very important to kind of link these things together. It's important to think about, if you're targeting a certain group of keywords and a certain feature, how does that carry through to your creatives to create kind of a consistent story as well, so you convert well once you get live in the store. A/B testing is incredibly important. A lot of people, when they think about A/B testing and building out the store listing, they think about doing that once they get the app live. But there are actually a lot of tools that are available where you can take this data that you're gathering, and you can do experimentation on what your store listing would look like before you even launch your app. We use a tool called SplitCube, where you can build virtual store listings that look exactly like the App Store and Play Store. There's a point-and-click interface to build them, and you can drive some traffic in and see how users respond to different value propositions, prioritization of different features and graphics, and get a sense of what your cost per install will look like, or your cost per acquisition will look like, before the app even goes live in the store. And this really helps from a market planning perspective, and also from a perspective of building out a business model for your product, where you've got a little bit more data to back up what you think is going to happen and what you think the outcome is going to be. We also want to make sure that we set the app up for A/B testing. Now, when you think about in-app A/B testing, you want to make sure that instead of having a debate over what that onboarding flow should look like, or how many slides it should have, or whether you should ask questions A, B, and C in the registration flow before people can see your content, you might want to A/B test that. And one of the ways that you can A/B test that is have some users come in through test flight, run a test through a platform like Optimize, where you can actually have a control and have a variant of those onboarding flows and watch what users do. A lot of times when you're doing pre-launch testing or beta testing for an app, you might send 1,000 users in and you're collecting, qualitative feedback from them. What do you think? Did you like it? Did you not like it? But with a platform like this, you can get quantitative feedback and actually see what they did and what works best. At Gummicube, we're big fans of quantitative data. So, these platforms are very useful even early on in the app lifecycle. And once you kind of put those processes together and you're getting ready to launch your app, do you have a soft launch strategy, right? Beyond beta, beyond test flight, beyond sending kind of a contained group of users in, how are you going to start to launch and kind of adjust the app in a way that's cash efficient, but also gives you the data that you need, so when you go to the larger markets, you're set up for success, right? And so, we think soft launch is really foundational when you're launching a new app. A lot of people choose to launch the app in a smaller region, maybe a Canada, maybe New Zealand, maybe in Indonesia. And the goal is really to understand, how do users engage once they get inside the app at greater scale? And is there a way that we could tune up monetization? Or is there a way that we could tune up users who kind of get through that flow, perhaps in a territory where it's a little less expensive to acquire new users that might not already be exposed to the app before we go into bigger markets? Soft launch is a great tool for people who are launching new apps. And a lot of people don't go through soft launch. They just kind of launch a big beta in a large market. And we think that soft launch is a great way to mitigate costs, and learn a lot. Finally, when we get into growth mode, right? We know that user acquisition is a fundamental driver of success. But we also know that in order to reduce our cost of acquisition across our entire user base, organic has to work. Otherwise, from a marketing standpoint, we're not going to be competitive with the marketing dollars that we have to spend. And so we really want to look at ASO and user acquisition as things that go hand in hand. And if they both go well, you end up, with a user ecosystem that's, affordable from a cost of acquisition standpoint, and you've got great engagement inside your app. I do think it's important to point out that, ASO is a continuous process, right? It's not something that you do once and walk away. Apple and Google go into learning mode. That learning mode is for a limited period of time. And you want to keep Apple and Google learning, and you want to keep responding to changes that your competitors make live in the store so you can be competitive. And so you want to leverage your data, and you want to always be learning, right, to be successful. Why should that evolve, right? There are a lot of reasons why that should evolve. Number one is that, Apple and Google and their stores are like e-commerce engines. They actually have more in common with Amazon.com than they do web search or web marketing. And because of that, they're constantly experimenting, making changes. They're sampling conversion rates for all the apps in the store every day. And, as your competitors run A/B testing, as seasonality changes what people are searching for, it's very, very important to keep up with that and make sure what you're showing users in the store is up to date. And I used the word merchandising earlier and e-commerce earlier, and it's an important concept to keep in mind because Apple and Google do merchandise you throughout the stores, and they use your relevancy scores. They use your conversion rates throughout the store, not just on your store listing, but your conversion rates throughout the store where people search and browse to understand where they should merchandise you. So if you're not doing this iteration, they're going to merchandise you a lot less. You're going to have fewer bites at the apple inside the store. It's important to pay attention to what consumers are searching for. It's important to pay attention to how your rankings change over time, not just for your targeted keywords, but for everything you rank for in the store, because that gives you clues in terms of where you're converting well, what features are performing well, which audiences are responding well to those changes that you're making. I feel like from a metadata standpoint, apps that are updated more frequently, we know are crawled more often, right? Apple and Google have a learning period. That learning period, which I mentioned earlier, lasts for about 30 days. After that, they stop learning. They stop crawling your app. And if you update on a regular cadence, what you end up doing is kind of locking those learning periods together. So they're always experimenting with you. And you end up getting merchandised in more places throughout the store. And as you get merchandised in more places, Apple and Google learn more, and they become much more efficient in terms of giving you placements in the store and understanding where they should feature you. So all of those things are important. The other thing that's just important to keep in mind is that as time goes on and your content on your store listing gets older, Apple and Google will find it to be less relevant than other apps that have updated more frequently. So all of those things are important to keep in mind, even if you're in growth mode, even if you're generating thousands of downloads a day, you've got to keep your store listing updated and you've got to still work on this. And, the way we look at kind of, ASO, we have technologies. DataCube is one of those technologies. It just gives us a whole view of everything that's going on in the store. And what we can work with our customers on, what we want, any app developer to do is become more relevant for the keywords that they care about, right? Understand how to really, spread the wings, build a lot of visibility in the store. You're competing with apps in most categories that rank for hundreds, if not thousands of keywords, if you actually look at everything that an app ranks for. And we have to understand how to compete from a visibility perspective, as well as how to compete from a conversion standpoint, so we can rank better and lower our cost of acquisition over time. A lot of people who are doing ASO, and when they're focusing on the search component of ASO, have this process where they're only looking at the keywords they target. They have a tool, whatever they're using, and you might type 20 or 30 keywords in. That's what you're tracking, and you attribute your downloads or success within search to only those keywords. And that is actually very flawed, right? If you don't understand everywhere Apple and Google are giving you visibility, and how that changes over time, you don't really have an understanding of where your downloads are coming from, because Apple and Google don't tell third parties how many downloads come from a keyword or how many searches there are for a keyword. It's important to have this aggregate factual data instead of just the estimates. And data is always a big theme at Gummicube, right? Having the right data, making sure that it's accurate, making sure that we understand search volume for keywords. It's we love, our mascot Cinnamon here. We built a nice cartoon, but at the end of the day, if you build your search optimization in the stores on a foundation with data that's just not accurate, you're never going to get to that top level, right? You're never going to reach the prize or the reward. And unfortunately, web and mobile data does not overlap, right? People don't search for the same things in the App Store and Play Store as they do on the web. So we shouldn't be using data from Google AdWords to choose what keywords we're targeting in mobile. And also, Apple Search Ads data, although Apple has all this great popularity score data inside Apple Search Ads, popularity scores aren't really a measurement in a perfect way of search volume for a keyword, right? A popularity score is helping people understand how many clicks are happening in a paid ad unit. It's helping people understand where they should, or where there's inventory to bid on in search ads, but it's not intended to be a representation of demand within organic search. And I think that's where a lot of, frankly, a lot of tools, get it wrong, because that's the primary metric that they're looking at for search volume. I think there are a lot of dangers in making guesstimates, and even more than dangers in making guesstimates, there are dangers when you do that and you don't really know where the data comes from. I always tell people, whenever you're talking to someone and they're saying they know exactly how many downloads came from a specific keyword, and they know that these keywords are driving all of your downloads, and that's what you should focus on, I will run, not walk away from those people. Because we all know, as marketers, Apple and Google do not share that information with third parties. And if you're relying on a guesstimate that primarily is based on looking only at the apps you target. So let's say you have an app that ranks for 1,000 keywords, but you're only paying attention to 20 or 30 keywords, tracking them. And then you're looking at all the installs that come in from search and attributing those installs to 20 or 30 keywords that you're tracking. You end up kind of creating this self-fulfilling prophecy where, because you're only tracking those keywords, you're only attributing to those keywords, and you're just dividing your search installs across them based on an imputed volume and how well you rank. And unfortunately, that is not accurate, right? If you rank for 1,000 keywords, you're getting a lot of installs from that long tail in most cases. And so that's not really a great way to estimate keywords per download. You also want to make sure that, while popularity scores are interesting, that you're looking at solid historical data in the stores that's representative of seasonality, that's representative of how users behave below the ad in organic search to make good decisions from an ASO standpoint. Just like in the stock market, there's a difference between what you would do as a day trader and what you would do if you're building out a retirement portfolio. There are significant differences in how you would run an ASA campaign and make decisions, and how you would build out an ASO strategy. These two things are not the same. And Apple Search Ads, while it's a great advertising platform, is not ASO. ASO involves these other things as well, and ASA can supplement what you're doing on the ASO side. I also think that, iteration and seasonality are important things to pay attention to. I love, the retail example, because I feel like many retailers have very strong brands. They want to focus on their brand and their messaging. But in the App Store, when people are scrolling the App Store, it's very much like an Instagram experience, right? You're scrolling the search result very quickly. You stop on something that interests you, you click the get button. You may not even go to the store listing to read more about what's going on. And so as a result, it's really important to leverage the assets for your app that appear in search to address things like seasonality, right? If you're a retailer and we're not highlighting Black Friday, your market share is going to go down over the holiday season as apps that do highlight Black Friday take over the shopping category, right? And so it's important to understand how to leverage your assets, but also leverage what's going on seasonally, so that an app and your product and your brand is continually relevant to consumers in the store. At the end of the day, the app is not, we always say the app is no longer just an extension of something. The app is a primary vehicle for discovery, right? That's where people are discovering and interacting with brands, discovering new products. It's where they're transacting nowadays. There's been a huge shift from the web to mobile. And so this is where, you have an opportunity to get in front of consumers. The other thing is Apple and Google really do reward iteration. Like if you look at some of the apps out there that do rank for thousands of keywords in the App Store and Play Store, these are the apps that are updating, every 3 to 4 weeks, right? They're changing, they're experimenting, they're stimulating Apple and Google to crawl them and learn. And as a result of that, Apple and Google are rewarding them with essentially earned traffic or earned visibility because they know where they convert well, and they're merchandising them in a lot of places, even beyond what that app is targeting. So it's important to pay attention. There is a snowball effect, right? And you don't see that snowball effect if you're only tracking a small number of keywords, but if you can see the entire store, you see what happens as that picks up. From a conversion optimization standpoint, users are going to behave differently depending on their journey to find your app. There are great tools that Apple and Google make available inside their stores: Google Play Experiments, product page optimization, custom product pages. And there are also external tools like SplitCube that you can use for A/B testing outside of the store. One thing that's just important to keep in mind is, if you're optimizing for organic conversion, it's important to test inside the store, because users organically are, scrolling the store. Your first job is to get them to stop on your app and click download. And that's a competitive environment, not an environment where a user sees an ad, clicks through, and goes to your store listing directly, and all they see is your content. So we want to make sure that depending on what we're doing, are we trying to optimize organics? Are we trying to optimize paid user acquisition? That we're using the right tools and that we're set up for representative success, right, as we're running A/B testing. Everyone's very familiar with Google Play A/B testing. It's been around for many, many years. And you can test most of your store listing, right, as you're, doing A/B on Google Play. You can't test your title. You have to do a new release to test your title. But it's a very flexible platform. It's more mature than Apple product page optimization. And we use it all day long. And even though we have a platform like SplitCube, and even though there are other platforms similar to SplitCube in the marketplace, we still test inside the store, because Facebook traffic and traffic from external ad networks is not always representative of how users behave inside the store. And so this is important. Product page optimization, on the Apple side, super excited they introduced this, super helpful. What we've found is that, as you're running product page optimization, there are some little quirks that people are getting over. Like, for example, if you do a new release, it will stop your A/B tests. So you've got to kind of plan releases to happen outside of the periods of time that you're A/B testing. And ultimately, Apple does have to approve the assets that you're running, and that can take a little bit of time as well. So that has to be built into the plan. When you're thinking about conversion rates, you can't ignore reviews and ratings. You can't ignore what users are saying about your app. And also Apple and Google use that data to determine where you might be relevant to some extent. A lot of people don't know this, but Apple and Google do crawl user reviews. They look at the content inside those reviews. And, if people are mentioning a certain feature or a certain word frequently, it might give you an advantage ranking for that word or that term. They also look at your star rating. If you have a good conversion rate and it's almost equal to another app in the store, the app with a better star rating is going to step ahead. So it's important to pay attention to those things. And also, you want to optimize inside the app, right? Ultimately, when you really start spending money on growth, right, and you're having conversations with your team or management, right, what they're looking for is, what is my cost to get a user who completes registration? What is my cost to get a user that pays? Because ultimately, we want our marketing to have positive ROAS, right? And one of the ways to do that is actually by A/B testing inside the app. And if you start from day one building a discipline to have different things to experiment with inside your app, build in multiple onboarding flows, build in different registration flows, experiment with whether you should ask for the email address on step 1 or step 5. You're going to be able to have a much more dynamic experience optimizing those elements and getting to a lower CPA. If you're in a cycle where to make a single change or experiment, you've got to release a new build of your app, it's just not efficient. And when you're spending a lot of money on marketing, it's important that you can experiment with things very efficiently and quickly, and that you can solve problems very efficiently and quickly. There are a lot of great case studies that we have kind of using this technology. For example, Vivo leveraged it to A/B test their onboarding flow. They were testing kind of a thesis around whether they wanted to have an onboarding flow that had 4 or 5 images in it, or whether they wanted to have a simple onboarding flow with 2 steps. We got over 160,000 users through the flow. The test ran for 28 days, and we found out that new signups increased by almost 6% by shortening the onboarding flow. And so, a lot of people think about their onboarding flows and they want to introduce users to the app, but this actually taught us that, at least for this brand, for this app, it was much better to have a shorter flow. And this is the kind of test you can run with a platform like Optimize if we're kind of getting ahead of the process, and instead of having a debate internally about whether one is better than the other, let's just build them both in, run an A/B test, and then with a push of a button, when we learn what's best, we default to the one that works. From a paid and organic standpoint, we really want to have synergies, right? And when you're optimizing all of these things, right, you can get those synergies. In addition to the optimization process, it's important to understand what channels can help you from an ASO standpoint. I said earlier that, Apple Search Ads doesn't drive ASO, but it complements it. And I mean that. I realize there are a lot of agencies, out there that might say, hey, if you want to do great with ASO, just spend more money on Apple Search Ads. That's not the right answer, right? That's just kind of what a media buying agency says because they know how to buy media. The truth is ASA does help, but ASO and ASA work together. You have to do them both well in order to reduce your cost of acquisition and have very high relevancy, which gets you market share in ASA. It can help you build organic rank. It can help, ASO can help ASA performance, but you can't use ASA to replace ASO. Anyone who's trading dollars for real optimization is really hurting their bottom line. And so, we want to create symbiosis between these two things. We want to build relevancy over time, drive more conversion, learn from the data that we can obtain when we're running an ASO campaign to do better everywhere in the store. Finally, just like talking about kind of maturity and saturation, right? For apps that have been live for a very, very long time, maybe they have millions of users, right? Well, once you convert your users in the store, because of how the stores are becoming more dynamic, a lot of your content is invisible, right? Apple shrinks your listing as people are scrolling through the store. So what we really want to do is balance between retention and acquisition, and understand there are certain things that we have to optimize for, like events, like in-app optimizations, like experimenting with new features, and really focusing on how we position our apps to take advantage of seasonality in the store to make them constantly relevant for users in order to succeed long-term, right? And so, a brand can be important. It can be very valuable, but a brand alone won't help you succeed in a store that's really a meritocracy, right? And it's rewarding people who are converting better and being a little bit more dynamic in what they put in the stores. And I think a lot of apps are catching on to this. We work with a lot of wonderful brands that are doing a very, very good job in the store, but it's important to think of the store as something that's always moving, especially if you're a mature app. When we think about re-engagement, we do think about product page re-engagement, right? How are we leveraging not just in-app events, but also how are we making sure that our screenshots and other content are up to date to cater to what we're currently promoting? What we've learned is that a lot of users will actually pick up their phone on Apple. They'll go to Spotlight Search and they'll look for an app that they've already downloaded, and then they'll see your store listing sometimes. They might see other apps pop up in recommendations from Apple. And so having all of those touch points aligned and relevant is incredibly important. We also want to make sure that we're responding to users, we're engaging with users inside the app, we're A/B testing that experience all the time so that our cost of acquisition remains low and efficient, and that users are seeing refreshed experiences over time. We don't want people to get bored, and we want to show them what's relevant today. And we also want to think about re-engagement campaigns from a marketing standpoint to kind of get in front of users and remind them that we're here. If a user has, 200 apps on their phone, they may not even remember they downloaded an app, and we have to make sure that we're still getting in front of them. So, ultimately we want to build on these successes. We want to iterate, right? We want to have external efforts going on, right? We want to have in-app marketing going on. We want to have a good strategy for notifications and in-app optimization. But we want to also we also want to not forget about what's going on in the store, right? Ultimately, if your store listing is a little bit stagnant, we're not leveraging events in these things, we're not going to be successful or maintain success long term. I talked a little bit earlier about store ads, but just to really double down on this, right? They do give you more visibility in the store. If you can afford to do ASA and you align ASA with ASO, it really can be a great opportunity to get more visibility in the store. It also gives you a lot of great data. Conversion rate per keyword, for example, is something that you can't get in App Store Connect, but you can get that in the Search Ads console. That's valuable data, even if you're just running a test. We also want to make sure that, especially in maturity, we're understanding where do users drop off? How do we develop better experiences? How do we develop more personalized and more satisfying experiences inside the app so we can keep users engaged? And so don't let that A/B testing muscle and discipline end once a user downloads the app. We really have to kind of continue doing this and experimenting inside the app to keep users engaged. So ultimately, right, reliable data is incredibly important. Change in testing, it's a basic requirement of app success, not just ASO. And leveraging store channels can all help in this process. Having accurate and reliable data is very important, right? And also keeping in mind, no matter who you work with or what tools you use, there are certain things that Apple and Google don't provide to third parties. There's no one who actually knows the number of downloads per keyword or the number of individual searches per keyword. Whenever you see a number like that, unless you're pulling it from the Google console or the Apple console, where there's not a whole lot of data like that, it's just an estimate. And usually it's not a great estimate. From an adaptability standpoint, be flexible, right? Be flexible to experiment with new things and understand that the App Store and Play Store as an e-commerce environment allows apps to thrive when they experiment, right? And when they're relevant and when they have new content to offer. And always be testing. Never forget, ASO, every part of this process is continuous. It doesn't end, right? It's not just like SEO for apps where you write a new store listing and then walk away for 6 months while the web crawls you. Apple and Google crawl you in 30 days, much more dynamic. And so, these are our tips, and this is kind of our framework for how we think about app optimization. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I know there have been some questions in the chat, but really appreciate everyone's time today, and we can hop into Q&A if there are any questions.
Great, thanks, Dave. We do have a few, so let's crack into that. I'll give you a minute. Do you want a sip of water before we unleash? We're going to unleash the questions. Okay, hopefully we've got, okay, people have managed to get the email there, and we've got a big green button also there with a link to Gummicube if anyone wants to get in touch. Let's dive into these questions. Here we go. So question one, okay, we'll start with Melissa's question. She was the first ask. She said, how would you test icons for a pre-launch title?
So for a pre-launch, to test icons, we would probably use an external testing platform like a SplitCube, where we can actually set up an entire store listing, or we can simulate a search result as well. So it doesn't have to be your store listing. It can also be how the search result looks, where the icon's a little bit more prominent and consumers make choices. Profile an audience, drive in some traffic, whether it's a Facebook web click campaign or whether it's traffic from your website, and really understand kind of how users are interacting and which variants of the icon perform best for your app.
Okay, hopefully that helps, Melissa. Edward is asking, you were talking about KPIs at the start, and it's asking, how do I know the best KPI for my product?
So I think, number one, it's important to do research about your category and generally understand, if you're building a product in an established category or subcategory, what market intelligence can we gather about how other apps are performing, so we can at least understand baseline KPIs, whether that's your conversion rate for kind of your cohort of apps, whether that's the number of keywords your competitors rank for, which means how much data are they sending to Apple and Google to build relevance, or whether that's a cost of acquisition. And even though we don't have a lot of data up front when we're building an app for that particular app, it's important to start setting some goals and understand, well, what will it probably cost us to acquire a user? And when we start running some traffic, are we above or below that? As we start doing ASO, how many keywords do our competitors rank for? How many do we rank for? And kind of where's that overlap developing? So it's really just about having a discipline from day one, understanding what we're shooting for. And there are ways that you can leverage, tools again like SplitCube to learn a little bit more before you launch an app, right? You can experiment with a few different landing pages, drive in some traffic, get estimated cost per installs for your app, and compare that with the industry average, so that you can start to have a business plan that's a little bit more driven by data.
Great. Hopefully that helps, Eduardo. Okay. Next up, we have Matej. Suppose I use a certain keyword in the app metadata. How do I know this keyword is the right keyword for my app, or if it should be removed? Additionally, when is the right time to remove the keyword from the metadata?
So, number one, it's important when you're selecting keywords to understand what category they're relevant for and what other apps people are downloading when they search. One of the big problems I have with a lot of tools that are out there is they have this concept of a difficulty score, which in my mind is kind of bogus in a lot of ways, because any time you have a lot of different apps plugged into a tool and it's giving you the same difficulty score for all of the apps, they're trying to solve difficulty like a crowded highway problem, where the more apps that rank for a keyword, the more difficult it is, instead of focusing on relevancy. And I mentioned relevancy because if you go to Apple and Google's website, they tell you the more relevant your app is, the easier it's going to be for you to rank on keywords and get visibility in the store. Now, part of that basic research that we want to do is understand, based on what users are downloading for that keyword, is there a match for your category? Is there a match for the features inside your app? Because that helps us understand the likelihood of you ranking well, right? And it allows us to understand, once you do target that keyword, if for some reason you don't rank well, we know it's a conversion problem and not a relevance problem, right? We want to pull those things apart. The other thing is we want to understand that keywords you target influence Apple and Google to merchandise you. You might target a keyword and it might not rank really well initially in the first few weeks, but it might have just stimulated Apple and Google to rank you for a few phrases that do have a lot of volume. And so it's important to pay attention to everything that you rank for in the store, because if you remove that keyword, you might remove the traffic from other related terms that keyword influenced in the store. So we encourage you to look at it a little bit holistically, to look at it from a relevance standpoint. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if your app isn't ranking for that keyword and there are no related terms that it's driving, that's when maybe that wasn't a good keyword for you. But hopefully, if you look at research from a relevancy standpoint, that'll prevent you from making a choice where a little bit of time is wasted.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Hopefully that helped, Matej. And question for Nancy, and she's asking, can you use Optimize for tutorial completion in a gaming app?
You could, yeah. So any flow within an app, whether it's tutorial completion, whether it's the onboarding flow, even if you want to A/B test different invite a friend flows, right? You can do that, and we can show you how.
Great. Okay, so I hope that helps, Nancy. We've got a link here. I mean, I think we've got a link here. Grow your app with Gummicube. You can probably drop in there and get some help with that. Yeah. Okay. Jackie, which Charmaine has answered. Thank you. Wondering if you're going to receive a recording. Yes. Pretty much as soon as it's finished, there's a recording live. You can then sort of, if you want to share it, grab the URL, and that's good to go. Okay. And Deepak says, great session. I was trying to A/B test in my default language only. If the results are positive, then I'll localize to other language. Is this a good practice or not? If not, can you suggest a better way to increase conversion?
So it depends on whether there is kind of crossover from a culturalization standpoint in the other places, for those learnings. I feel like, an A/B test in the US is probably likely to work well in Canada, but an A/B test in the US is probably not likely to work well in Japan, right? Where styles are very different and people, respond differently to visuals and creative. And so, I would say do the logical thing and think of A/B testing also from a culturalization standpoint, and understand based on where you're deploying your app and how culturalization might be different across the territories, you might want to have different tracks of A/B testing, for certain countries that are just very different than whatever kind of your base is.
Okay, hopefully that helped you, Deepak. So, okay, that's our questions answered. So, Dave, I guess so. Next steps for everyone. Okay, here's another question. All right, one more. Thanks, Walid. Are the keywords we set prioritized? So, if we set 100 keywords, does the App Store look at our keywords based on the priority we set?
Well, so at a high level, obviously you're limited in the number of keywords you target directly through metadata based on the character limits in that metadata. But Apple and Google do kind of almost have a priority depending on where you place those keywords. So obviously with Apple, the keyword field, the title, the subtitle, very important. When you look at Google Play, the title is important, the most important. The short description is second on that list. And then finally, what you put in your description should be supportive of those primary keywords you target. And Google will crawl that as well. But it does seem to prioritize kind of the fields that have the least amount of character space first.
Great. And Jackie has another question. I'm not going to let you go just yet. We're going to keep you while we've got you. Are short description tests more important than long description tests? Yeah.
From a conversion standpoint, they can be. What I would say is that the short description, as well as what I would call like the first 2, 3, 4 sentences of your long description, tend to be very important for conversion. After that point, users usually stop reading. So those are the elements that you want to experiment with.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you, Dave. So I think that's it for now. Maybe do another session and get some more questions in. I think we covered everyone's questions. Thank you for asking them. So people should just head over to gummicube.com and get in touch from there, and they can find out more about Aptimize or SplitCube, all of these tools and services.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for your time. It was great to be here.
Thank you, Dave. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks for joining us.